For years, Joseph Stalin presented himself as a protector of the people. But behind that image was a far darker reality. He turned women into targets and punished them in public in ways so brutal that it's almost impossible to believe. Their lives were torn apart by a fear no one could escape. It all started after the Russian Revolution in 1917. The new Soviet leaders said the old world of kings and rich elites was gone. They promised fairness, safety, and a better future for everyone. Women were told their lives would improve. They would work, vote, and be equal to men. For a short time, some of this felt real. Women entered schools and factories. They became nurses, teachers, and clerks. Many believed the state was finally on their side. But this hope didn't last long. By the early 1930s, Joseph Stalin had taken full control of the country. Power was no longer shared. Fear became the main tool of rule. The government no longer trusted its own people. Police watched neighborhoods closely. Letters were read. Neighbors reported on each other. At night, black cars stopped outside apartment buildings. Men were taken away quietly. No explanation was given. By morning, their beds were empty. Families were left frozen in fear, afraid to ask questions. At first, it seemed like only men were being targeted. Party officials, soldiers, factory managers, and farmers disappeared. But very soon, the terror spread deeper. Homes were no longer safe places. Wives woke up not knowing if they would still be free by nightfall. Mothers worried that their children's last normal day had already passed. Being related to the wrong person became dangerous. Guilt no longer depended on what you did. It depended on who you were connected to. Stalin spoke publicly as if he cared about families. In 1936, he made a statement saying that children should not suffer for the crimes of their parents. On the surface, this sounded humane. Many people wanted to believe it. But behind the scenes, the opposite was happening. Orders were already being prepared to punish entire families. The words were meant to calm the public, not to protect them. By 1937, Stalin no longer hid his fear of family loyalty. He believed family bonds were dangerous because they created trust outside the state. He feared wives would defend husbands. He feared children would remember. So he decided families had to be broken. When a man was accused of being an enemy, his family became suspicious by default. Arrests were no longer individual. They became collective. When men vanished, wives and children often vanished soon after. No charges were shown. No trials were held. People were simply removed, as if erased. This period became known as the Great Purge. It reached its peak between 1936 and 1938. Stalin had already eliminated most of his political rivals. Now, the terror widened. Ordinary workers were accused. Farmers were accused. Teachers, clerks, and engineers were accused. Entire ethnic groups were targeted. The state needed enemies, and it found them everywhere. Being innocent offered no protection. In August 1937, a secret police order changed life for women forever. This order declared that the wives of accused traitors to the state were to be punished automatically. No evidence was required. No crime had to be proven. The wife did not need to know about her husband's alleged actions. Her connection to him was enough. The punishment was severe. Most women were sentenced to many years of forced labor. Their homes were taken. Everything they owned was treated as stolen property. Across the country, similar cruel patterns repeated. A woman would be told her husband had been detained for questioning. She was asked to bring documents or clothing and come to an office. She believed cooperation would help. Many dressed carefully, hoping to make a good impression. They traveled long distances by train, carrying hope with them. Instead of seeing their husbands, they were met by armed officers. Doors closed behind them. From that moment on, their old lives were over. By early 1938, Stalin's prisons were overflowing. Arrests were happening faster than cells could be filled. That's why in the winter of 1938, the Soviet government opened a camp unlike most others. It was officially called Akmola Camp, for the wives of traitors to the motherland. Prisoners quickly shortened the name to Alzir. The camp was built in the empty Kazakh steppe, far from cities, rail hubs, and witnesses. The location was chosen on purpose. Escape was nearly impossible, and suffering could remain unseen. The first group of women arrived on January 6, 1938. There were 1,600 of them, brought directly from Moscow's Bordzirka prison. Many believed they were being transferred for questioning. Instead, they were marched into an unfinished camp surrounded by wire and guards. Over the next years, train after train arrived. Women came alone, with children, or pregnant. By the time the camp closed, historians believe more than 18,000 women had passed through Alzir. Some stayed a few years. Others spent a decade or more. Many never left alive. Even today, the exact death toll is unknown because records were hidden or destroyed. The women sent to Alzir came from every part of the Soviet Union. They spoke different languages and followed different traditions. Some came from large cities. Others came from villages that barely appeared on maps. Among them were Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Georgians, Poles, Jews, Koreans, Kazakhs, and others. Some were wives of high-ranking officials. Others were married to factory workers or soldiers. Many were educated and respected in their communities. Some had never worked outside the home. None of this mattered. The camp made no distinctions. Once inside, everyone was treated the same. From the moment they arrived, the women lost their identities. Guards took away personal papers, photos, and letters. Names were replaced with numbers. A woman who had once been known as a doctor, a teacher, or a mother was now only a number on a list. Roll calls happened every morning and evening. Missing a count meant punishment for the whole group. The physical conditions were harsh from the start. When the first women arrived, Alzir had only 2 wooden barracks. Each was packed with hundreds of prisoners. The winter of 1938 was brutal. Inside the barracks, the cold never truly left. There was little insulation and almost no fuel. Women slept fully dressed, pressed tightly together to stay warm. Frost formed on the walls. Many woke up with frozen hair and numb fingers. Work began immediately. From morning until night, the women were forced outside, even in freezing temperatures. Their first task was to gather reeds from a frozen lake nearby. These reeds were dried and burned to heat the camp, though they barely helped. Marching back and forth through the snow and ice became part of daily survival. Weak women collapsed often. Falling behind meant beatings or loss of food. As months passed, the camp slowly expanded, built by the prisoners themselves. Women with technical knowledge were ordered to design new structures. Others mixed clay and straw with their bare feet to form bricks. These bricks were dried in the open air and used to build more barracks. Intellectuals became construction workers. Artists carried stones. Former professors shoveled mud. The work never stopped, even when hands bled or feet froze. Food was always scarce. Women dreamed of food and talked about recipes from home just to distract themselves. In summer, thirst became another weapon. Guards sometimes denied water as punishment. Some women were sprayed with hoses under the hot sun, but were not allowed to drink. It was cruelty meant to break spirits. For mothers, Alzire was especially cruel. Many had already lost husbands to execution or camps. Now they feared losing their children too. Some women arrived with infants. Others were pregnant from before their arrest. Babies were born in freezing barracks with almost no medical help. Mothers wrapped them in rags and tried to keep them alive while still being forced to work. Many babies did not survive the harsh conditions. The journey to Alzire itself killed many children. Prison transport trains were overcrowded and sealed shut. Dozens of people were crammed into each car. There was little air, no proper toilets, and barely any heat. Journeys could last weeks or even months. Children became sick. Some froze. Others starved. When they died, their bodies were removed at remote stops and buried nearby. Mothers were rarely told where. One of the most painful acts forced on women was choosing between children. Camp officials sometimes allowed only one child to stay with a mother. The others were taken away to orphanages. These choices were made under threat and fear. Mothers knew choosing one meant losing the other forever. Scenes like this happened again and again. Violence was also part of daily life. Some women were abused by guards. Years later, records show that more than 1,500 children were born in Alzire as a result of rape. Yet even in this place, small acts of humanity appeared. Local Kazakh villagers knew what was happening behind the fences. They were poor themselves, but some still tried to help. When prisoners went out to work near the lake, villagers would throw small hard objects toward them. Guards thought they were stones. In reality, they were pieces of dried food. The women learned to recognize them and hide them quickly. These small gestures helped many survive. And the women who survived later left written memories, giving us rare windows into what the camp truly meant on a human level. One of them was Galina Stepanova Kluknikova. She was young, intelligent, and still studying when her life collapsed. Her husband was a mathematics professor, a quiet academic with no power or influence. One night, he was arrested and accused of spying. Like thousands of others, he just disappeared without explanation. Soon after, in 1938, Galina was arrested as well. She was only 20 years old when she entered Alzire. She would spend the next 5 years there, losing her youth behind barbed wire. Later in life, she described the women around her as pale, shaved-headed, and terrified. Many looked like children, even though they were adults. Hunger and fear had stripped them of their strength and dignity. Galina survived, but the years she lost could never be returned. Another woman whose story became known was Rachel Plitsetskaya. Before her arrest, she had lived a cultured and comfortable life. She was a successful actress and moved in elite artistic circles. She even knew Stalin's wife personally. None of that saved her. In 1938, her husband, Mikhail Plitsetsky, a Soviet diplomat, was arrested and executed. Soon after, Rachel was taken as well. She arrived at Alzire with her young twin children. Camp life for a mother was especially cruel. Forced labor, freezing temperatures, and constant hunger made survival hard enough. Caring for children under these conditions was almost impossible. Her twins were eventually taken from her and placed in state care. One of them, Maya Plizotskaya, would later become one of the most famous ballet dancers in the world. Her success was rare. For most children taken from Alzire mothers, the story ended in silence. The terror did not stop with ordinary citizens. Even women connected to the highest levels of power were not safe. Loyalty meant nothing if suspicion appeared. This fear extended into Stalin's own inner circle. Mikhail Kalinin was one of Stalin's oldest allies and held the formal title of head of state. Publicly, he was celebrated and respected. Privately, his family was destroyed. In 1937, Stalin's police targeted Kalinin's wife, Yekaterina. She was invited to a fashion shop inside the Kremlin, a place associated with privilege and safety. Instead of a fitting, she was arrested on the spot. She was accused of terrorism, a charge so vague it could mean anything. Her file was marked as especially dangerous. This meant harsher treatment and the hardest labor. She was sent far from Moscow and spent years in camps. Kalinin himself was old and sick by then. He begged Stalin repeatedly to spare his wife. Each request was ignored. Stalin eventually agreed to release her, only after the war ended in 1945. But even then, cruelty followed her. She was banned from living in Moscow and hundreds of other cities. She could not return home. Kalinin had to travel long distances just to see her. He died not long after, never living again with the woman he loved. Another painful example was Polina Shemkuzina, the wife of Vyacheslav Molotov, one of Stalin's most powerful ministers. Polina was not just a wife. She had been a committed revolutionary and a high-ranking official herself. She had worked closely with party leaders and was once trusted. Over time, Stalin turned against her. He disliked her independence and mistrusted her background. In 1948, he demanded that Molotov divorce her. Molotov refused. Stalin responded by ordering her arrest. Polina was accused of conspiracy and disloyalty. Her arrest was approved in a meeting where her own husband voted in favor, fearing what would happen if he opposed Stalin. Polina was sent into internal exile. She was cut off from her children and disappeared from public life. Molotov remained in power, silent and obedient. Only after Stalin's death in 1953 was Polina allowed to return. The damage to her family had already been done. After victory over Nazi Germany in May 1945, many Soviets expected relief. Soldiers came home, cities began to rebuild. There was hope that the terror years were over. Stalin even hinted that some prisoners might be freed. A few high-profile cases were quietly resolved. But for most women in camps and exile, nothing changed. Gates stayed locked, work continued, punishment remained routine. As the Cold War began, Stalin's fear turned outward and inward at the same time. He now saw enemies everywhere. Former prisoners of war were suspected of betrayal. People who had lived under German occupation were treated with distrust. Women who had survived the war years were questioned, watched, and sometimes arrested again. Even surviving hardship became suspicious in Stalin's eyes. By the late 1940s, Stalin launched a new wave of repression focused on ethnicity, especially Jews. This shift did not come from evidence, but from deep paranoia. Stalin believed foreign powers were plotting against him. Jewish citizens were suddenly described as disloyal, even if they had served the state for decades. This atmosphere poisoned daily life. Careers ended overnight. Friends stopped speaking to each other. Silence became a form of survival. Women were caught in this wave again. Wives of Jewish doctors, engineers, officers, and diplomats were arrested or pushed out of public life. Some were sent to labor camps. Others were sent into internal exile, forced to live in remote towns far from family. Their children were removed or pressured to denounce them. The climate of fear reached into science, medicine, and culture. Hospitals lost experienced staff. Research stopped. Fear replaced trust. The state prepared cases based on invented conspiracies. One of the most dangerous was the so-called doctor's plot, developed in 1952. Jewish doctors were accused of planning to kill Soviet leaders. Although the case was never fully carried out before Stalin's death, many families were already destroyed by arrests and interrogations. Stalin died on March 5, 1953. The news spread slowly, but carried enormous weight. For some, he was a hero. For others, he was a source of terror. For prisoners across the Soviet Union, his death meant a chance to survive. Hope returned quietly, passed from cell to cell in whispers. Within weeks, the leadership began to shift. Lavrenti Beria, who had overseen much of the terror, moved quickly to soften the system. Some investigations were stopped, interrogations slowed, prison conditions improved slightly. Soon, commissions were formed to review past cases. For the first time in decades, the state admitted that mistakes had been made. Women imprisoned as wives of traitors were among the first to benefit. Files were reopened, charges were reviewed. Many accusations were found to be based on nothing at all. Sentences were canceled. Women who had lost their youth behind barbed wire were suddenly told they were innocent. Freedom came suddenly, without explanation or apology. Alzir itself closed during this period. After operating for about 15 years, the camp was finally shut down. Women were released in waves. Some returned home, others had nowhere to go. Families were scattered. Many were physically weak and emotionally broken. Family reunions were painful. Children who had grown up in orphanages sometimes met their mothers as strangers. Years of separation could not be undone. In many cases, mothers and children tried to build relationships from nothing, carrying scars neither could fully explain. Not all women spoke about what happened. Silence had become a habit. For years, official history ignored their suffering. School books praised industrial growth and victory in war, but skipped the camps entirely. Only decades later did the truth begin to surface. Archives slowly opened. Historians found letters, orders, and lists of names. Magazines began publishing survivor stories in the 1980s. The public learned what had happened behind the scenes. Women who had been erased finally returned to history. In Kazakhstan, where Alzir once stood, a memorial now marks the site. In 2007, the government opened a museum called the Alzir Museum and Memorial Complex. There, visitors see the Arch of Sorrow, statues of women, and exhibitions of photos and belongings of the prisoners. Other countries have similar memorials or plaques. Grassroots projects in Ukraine, Russia, and the Baltic states have documented stories of individual women. For example, plays and films have started to tell the stories of wives of enemies of the people, highlighting how ordinary life was swept away. International historians and authors have published books on Stalin's wives. Most of the women are gone now, but their memory remains a testament.